Because I said what was on my mind. I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot of enemies.
Welcome, everyone, to the Science From the Fringe podcast. My name is Bryce Nickels. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University, and I'm joined today by Tim Hunt, who since 2022 has served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, abbreviated ARM, which is an advocacy organization that represents the cell and gene therapy community. Prior to becoming the CEO of ARM, Tim held senior leadership positions at several biotech companies, including Editas Medicine, Xilio Therapeutics, Cubist Pharmaceuticals, and Biogen. Over the course of his career, he's become increasingly engaged in questions surrounding the ethical governance of biotech, which is a topic of great interest to me, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have him on the podcast today. So, Tim, I really appreciate you joining me. Thanks for coming on the Science for the Fringe podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Bryce. Thanks for inviting me on. Looking forward to the discussion.
Another reason that I wanted to have you on, Tim, was that it became clear in perhaps March or April that the two of us had a difference of opinion on the way in which the FDA was being run during the time period where Marty McCary was in charge. And so we've had several conversations, and I've wanted to have you on to do a discussion, and in particular, a discussion because I think you have a different of opinion, frankly, on some of the things that I talked about during a March episode where I interviewed Anish Koka about the exit of Vinay Prasad from the FDA. Before we get into where we may differ on our opinions of the FDA and what should be done there, can you explain first what the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine is?
ARM it's a nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C. We've got over 400 members, and they're anything from small private biotech companies to public biotech companies to some of the large pharmaceutical companies. But as you noted, we're solely focused on gene therapies, essentially somatic cell gene therapy, gene editing, and cell therapy. We do a little bit of tissue engineering as well. And we also have about 50 patient organizations. Those are mostly rare disease patient organizations, although we have a few that are cancer focused. We also have some of the very large academic centers. So if you think of there's a big cell therapy center, one of the best in the world at the University of Pennsylvania, the Mayo Clinic, City of Hope, a number of big organizations like that are focused on cell and gene therapy. And we also have a number of our members that are based in Europe and a small number that are based across Asia. And so we convene the community. We gather a lot of data and have a lot of analytics around the field of cell and gene therapy. So we have an idea of how many clinical trials are going on around the world, for example. And then we do anything from traditional lobbying. Think of like stuff up on Capitol Hill or with the White House, HHS, FDA. We do work in Brussels as well. We work with the European Medicine Agency, the EMA, and the MHRA in the UK. So those are the regulators. And we also work on some technical projects historically with the FDA. And in fact, we continue to do that kind of work with the FDA at their request to date.
So backing up for a second, can you explain, maybe define some terms here for listeners that might not be familiar with what exactly is considered a cell or gene therapy?
Yeah, so gene therapies typically target, of late, they've targeted sort of monogenic disorders. So think of things like sickle cell disease or hemophilia, rare forms of blindness, where you might use something like an AAV vector, like a virus, that in the case of a blindness, you might inject behind the eye to try to restore someone's vision. In the case of sickle cell, you might extract somebody's cells and edit them and put them back into the body. You're trying to essentially combat these, oftentimes what we think of as sort of like break the glass disorders, right? So these are conditions where the patients are often declining fairly rapidly. For many of our patients, sort of time is life, time is functionality. There are areas like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, Huntington's disease, right? So those typically have been the focus of the somatic cell gene therapy. So when I say somatic cell, I'm also talking about things that are not reproductive cells, so sperm, egg, embryos, right? We'll get to that later, I think, in this discussion around germline editing. And then cell therapies have traditionally focused on liquid tumors, so lymphomas, for example, multiple myeloma. They essentially, you extract the cells, the T cells out, you buff them up, make them much more robust, implant them back into the patient, and they're able to fight off these horrible blood cancers. Oh, I should also mention, I've got a number of at the top. I should just say, to clear the deck, I've got a number of biases that I should call out. So obviously, I have a bias because I work on behalf of cell and gene therapy companies. I'm a true believer in this biotech, 40-year biotech revolution. Right? I think the broader biotech field has done a lot to save and improve lives over many years, albeit plenty of mistakes that have been made. And I also have personally, I have a son with a rare disorder called Dandy-Walker syndrome. It's a rare brain disorder. He's doing reasonably well. He's 20 years old. He has intellectual disabilities, speech issues, and other things. So I admit that I am close to the rare disease community. But because of my work and my personal life, I do encounter a lot of patients and caregivers and families that have children with some pretty rough stuff. And for me, it's always a good reminder that I'm one of the very blessed ones because our son is alive and doing relatively well.
In early April, I think is when I first talked to you.
Yeah.
I reached out to you in part because I saw that you wrote a op-ed in February that was critical of the FDA under Marty McCary. The op-ed, which appeared in the New York Post, was titled "How Trump's FDA is Breaking His Promise to America's Patients." What prompted you to write that op-ed?
It was out of considerable frustration with what was going on inside the FDA, and more, not even the FDA so much as within CBER, the biologics division at the time. And look, I don't want to make this personal. You're not asking me to. I know, I'm just giving you my view. So, I had met with Marty McCary on a number of occasions, and we had some very good discussions about a number of things. But today, setting that aside, I think it's my view on a lot of this thing, and I think this is the way I wrote the op-ed at the time, was not to make it personal, but make it philosophical, ideological about things like that, and management styles and approaches that I didn't agree with. And so what was really going on inside of CBER was something that had become really frustrating within our community, which was there was great talk and rhetoric and vision, really vision, sort of in that first, call it 6 months of the administration back in 2025, where they were talking about things like baby KJ and how they had helped enable that, which they clearly did, the administration did, where they had a compelling view of how to be the global leader in cell and gene therapy, which we were aligned with. And they had begun to roll out we thought, some helpful initiatives to try to do that. So, like, talking our language, there were there were some bumps in the road, I would say, in those sort of first 6 months, but by and large, we really liked the vision. But our view also was vision without execution is delusion, which is an old saying, right? And so by Q1 of this year, 2026, they had begun to kind of shoot down a number of what we thought were pretty promising cell and gene therapies. So there was one for a company called Atara, and they were partnered with Pierre Fabre for a cell therapy that had been approved in Europe. There was one from a company called Regenerative Bio for a really rough disorder called Hunter syndrome, so very rare condition. So this is a gene therapy to try to treat this very rough condition. And another one was Unicure, and that had gotten kind of hung up. They had some very positive data back in October of last year that they announced. By November, the FDA was saying, hey, they thought they had a path to filing with the FDA. The FDA was saying, hey, not so fast. We want to think about it more and essentially have them run a randomized clinical trial. And so we had tried to continue to meet and have discussions with the CBER folks. They did not seem to have much of an interest in speaking with us or people in the rare disease community. And so, as sort of a last final act of frustration, I penned an op-ed that I thought spoke the truth, which was that they were not aligned with the president's view and the bigger vision that the administration had, I think, nicely articulated about putting patients first, about being a global leader in cell and gene therapy, about winning a competitive race with China. Oh, and by the way, if you go back to the first Trump administration, they pushed and aggressively this notion of right to try, right? The idea that patients, especially if they're in really rough shape, if they're dying, they should be able to access clinical trials and have access to medicines. Well, that spirit had seemed to have been dead and buried by the time I wrote that op-ed. So despite, again, good talk about, no, we believe in this, it just, the actions were not meeting the rhetoric.
Ultimately, to me, it seems that the deciding factor should be how strong is the scientific evidence. We're not just making a decision to approve a drug for on a short-term basis. This is now going to be a therapy that is used not just for people that have the disease right now, but also for people in the future. And if the drug, in fact, is not, if the science isn't up to par, then what I would argue is that you're actually not only giving false hope to patients today, but now also making it harder to get real treatments for patients of the future. But I think that emotional appeals based on people with the illnesses and their suffering are not a good way to make decisions about approval of drugs, I guess is my general thought. So I don't know. You have a different opinion on that?
I do. Yeah, look, I think welcome to democracy, right? Like, and let me unpack that. 'Cause there's a few things to unpack. So one is, yeah, of course, the data matters, right? You mentioned trust a little while ago. I want to make sure I don't forget talking about the GMO experience, right? Which is the experience from GMO going back a few decades ago, right? Was essentially some of the big ag companies said, "Hey, we've got great data. We're going to put the gene of salmon or something into a tomato, and we're going to let that tomato grow in much colder weather, right? And we've got all kinds of data. Let's produce. We're going to show you the data." And guess what the consumer said? I don't, I don't really want the tomato with the salmon in it. And they said, don't worry, we'll go back and we'll get some more data. And they go off, and the companies would spend another few $100 million and come back and say, we've got more data. These GMOs work. They work. Eat them. And a lot of people were like, I don't want it. We'll be back. We'll go get some more data. Go back. They get more data. They come back. GMOs in big parts of Europe, right, are not like, good luck trying to find them, right? So my point is, it's not all just about data. Data is super important, and I will talk about data. But science meets society, right? And then people choose, and they have strong views. And if you want to see people with really strong views, go talk to parents that have children that have rare disorders, right? Where time is the enemy, where they're going to decline very quickly. And in my view, in our country, that's part of democracy. You said it. I mean, we all acknowledge they have the right to speak up, right? But some people at CBER, I think, really thought, I'm the expert. I know best, or we know best. Let's go off into a black box, and we will decide. We will not talk to the patient community. Because frankly, one of the things I called for in that op-ed was, hey, you know what? There are always reasonable scientific disagreements. Fair enough. You know what you do? Air it out. Hold an FDA advisory committee meeting. Bring in these, by the way, companies don't love these, but they're sort of not a bad last resort. Bring in some experts that actually understand neurological conditions in the case of a unicure or Huntington's disease, hopefully in particular. Let the FDA come in and speak its piece, but then let the company, fair enough. And I've been to an advisory committee meeting once upon a time when I was at a company called Biogen for a product called Tysabri. We were trying to bring it back from the market. And then, you know what? Open the doors and let sunlight be a good disinfectant. Let the patients speak. Because you know where that's helpful, Bryce? What it gets to is things like benefit and risk, right? Like, are you willing to take a risk on, in this case, a gene therapy, right? And so I think that for an administration that talked about radical transparency, that would seem to have been a really logical thing to do. Bring some radical transparency to it. Now, on the data side of the house, I think there are always reasonable disagreements that pop up with the FDA. And by the way, what you describe, I have heard from senior FDA officials, right? That, look, you can unleash these lobbying campaigns in support of one drug or another drug, and it's tough on the FDA. Well, I mean, welcome to the last 50 years, more. This has always been going. Medical device companies, right? Biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies. I don't know the ag side pretty well. I'm sure there's some of that goes on too, right? It's part of our democratic experiment, largely, in general. And again, we can talk more about that. But I think what really started to change was the FDA. It seemed to me began back in essentially Q4 of last year. We saw it more in Q1. Began to move the goalposts, which I think was the problem, right? And why was that? Well, what really happened was a few things. One, a new and toxic methodological purity crept into the FDA. They put a very, very academic, extreme view of the world, over regulatory flexibility for rare and fatal disorders. And again, this is sort of in the face of all the rhetoric that we were hearing, right? And then there was a breakdown in management, right? It kind of ushered out a number of senior people, including doctors, that actually knew how to handle a lot of the stuff. And frankly, if you end up with a lot of junior reviewers, that's not great. Um, and then I think there was sort of, as I'm touching on, a sort of super high skepticism of others, right? I'm putting others in quotes, patient organizations, biotech companies, outside experts, not just the people that work at the FDA, right? And I think some saw monsters under the bed and had, a deep and strong views that they knew best, and they would prefer to go off into a black box and make some of these decisions. And I think that I will tell you, when I started seeing some of this pop up, I thought this isn't going to last. I think this is one thing I can definitely agree with you and your previous guest from a few months ago. And I think you guys said this is going to be, is this tenable really over time? And I think, it turned out to not be the case. But just like when we talk about the data, right? Like, and I mentioned this new methodological purity that had emerged, right? How does it show up, right? It's really around requirements for randomized control trials in the cell and gene therapy space. And I'd say most of us acknowledge that randomized controlled trials are the gold standard for clinical trials, in the world with an active comparator, right? That works well when you have huge indications. Small molecules for cholesterol lowering agents, big trials, 10,000 patients for cardiology, right? Where there's a standard of care and you want to introduce a new drug and you can compare them, right? Makes sense. But in the rare disease space, especially where the clock is the enemy, it is not typically used for cell and gene therapy. So, for example, I'll give you a data point, right? 79% of all the cell and gene therapies that are approved by the FDA are single-arm trials based on a single-arm trial, right? And that includes so Unicure is not counted because it hasn't been approved yet. Regenix Bio, right? Atara. Guess what the number is in Europe? 88%. So this notion that some have tried to put into the groundwater, that the FDA lowered the bar and let all of these sort of unproven, unsafe cell and gene therapies, if that were the case, how do you explain Europe? Are they, and I haven't done the math on the MHRA, but of course they have, they don't have the same track record over time. So my view is just that, look, it's nonsense that the FDA, again, there are reasonable scientific debates about a product here or a product there. But I think if you look over time, the reality is these single arm trials are a needed tool. Why? Because there's usually super small patient populations. There is not a standard of care that oftentimes you can give someone. And a lot of times it's to actually enroll a clinical trial there are some ethical concerns about like, what would you actually give if you're going to require a placebo that involves brain surgery or things like that?
The concern I have, and a lot of people have as well, is just sort of the monetary component. And how do you separate the incentive for biotech companies who, in many cases, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but these rare disease drugs, there's, the value, the existence of the company relies upon a decision by the FDA to approve the drug, right? So
Yeah.
we're talking the entire company's existence and hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever rely upon a regulatory decision at the FDA. And in that particular case, it's difficult for people to believe that decisions or like that the decisions are really being driven by the best interest of the patient with so much money on the line. Can you respond to that concern?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes the best thing to do is ask the patients, open the door, right? Like, so, and this gets to like, people's different views on patients and patient organizations, right? So I mentioned I've attended one FDA advisory committee meeting many years ago for a very powerful drug called Tysabri for multiple sclerosis. Biogen at the time was sort of the global leader in the MS field. There weren't that many drugs approved, and this was going to look like it could be a really meaningful step up in efficacy, right? So, but we found 3 deaths in the clinical trials after it had been approved. It had been approved sort of early because the data was so compelling, and then later we did a safety review and found there had been 3 deaths in the clinical trials. So we ended up spending a year trying to understand what's the risk, who's at risk, how do you mitigate the risk, like get our hands around the risk. Had all the data. We go to the FDA for an advisory committee meeting. And they said, hey, the only thing we know is if this drug, first thing they said, if this drug gets approved, there'll be more death for multiple sclerosis patients because people will die because they take this drug. We thought the risk was about 1 in 1,000 that people would die, right? And there were ways to monitor it. There was ways to manage the risk, but it wasn't insignificant, right? Company got up, they gave their side of the story, and then they opened the day for the patients. 30 patients spoke, and there were probably 5 times when there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Why is that important? Not just for the emotion, but like I said earlier, you have to have people understand the risk and the benefit, and hearing from the patient, right? Some patients say, I don't want the risk of multiple sclerosis, a 1 in 1,000 chance of a death. I'm doing fine. We had patients that were on our other drug, Avonex, and they were running marathons, right? They felt great. We had others that were declining rapidly, and they're like, this drug allowed me to walk. And what do you mean you guys think you might take it away? I need this drug, right? So there's clearly a subset of people who think this is important to have on the market, right? And so I think, I'm a big believer in the First Amendment. The antidote to, some speech is more speech. Open the doors, let people speak, and listening to patients, designing clinical trials with patient input, hearing from patients about things like risk and benefit, hearing from patients about what's the journey like for their loved one or themselves, I think is critically important. And I think some people have this sort of, I don't know what to call it, a 1990s view that patients are bought and paid for. I'm telling you, you could spend some time with patients I know that have lost loved ones or their kids are in rough shape. These people have gone out, they've started foundations, they've raised money, they're supporting clinical trials. They want to see breakthroughs because what? These are break the glass medicines, and they know what the natural history is. They know their child's going to decline rapidly and then die.
I think I just fundamentally disagree with you on this. It doesn't seem to be a rational way or logical way to make the best long-term decision when you are using the experiences of patients dealing with life and death decisions in that moment.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask it. The example I used earlier, multiple sclerosis. So this is not cell and gene therapy. So I'm getting out of my sandbox here.
Yeah.
There's a 1 in 1,000. You're a regular at the FDA. There's a 1 in 1,000 chance that a patient could die if they get on this product. How are you going to make a decision if that should be approved or not? What's your decision going to be based on?
I don't know the answer to what the right way to do it is, but
Okay.
I just think that it doesn't seem like the way in which the patient voices have been used in the rare disease space just seems, I guess, just off to me. It sort of muddies the water, which is what the real issue should be. Is we should make determinations based on the safety of the therapy determined by a very transparent process, as you were advocating for a moment ago.
So I don't think the patient perspective muddies the water. I think it clears the water. Let me give you some ideas. One was what I just told you. I think, how do you look? These products are neither purely safe nor purely effective, right? These are really powerful agents that typically go in cell and gene therapies that go in, and you're trying to hit something hard because it's a tough disorder to crack, right? So we think in terms of risks and benefit, but risks and benefit is a relative term. What's the benefit compared to what's the risk? Chemotherapy. There's a lot of risk in chemo, but oftentimes it's greater benefit, but not for everybody. Blood thinners, same thing, right? So getting the patient perspective oftentimes helps clarify through surveys and things like that. Like, for example, one patient advocate I know spoke to the FDA in recent months, last 3 months, said, "Hey, look, we thought about trying to design a randomized controlled trial, right? Like, could that work in this one area?" We went out to our patient community and said, "What do you guys think?" And they lay it out. They worked with clinicians. They laid out, this is what it would involve. No way. No way. Fake surgery? Forget it. We're not going to do it. Like, so you end up with, this is a patient organization, right? You end up with, how long would it take to enroll this clinical trial? Could take 5 years, could take 7 years, right? Patients are declining rapidly. So there's lots of ways to get, I think, appropriately to get patient input into the entire journey. And, some of the motto that you hear this in the sickle cell community, sort of nothing for us without us, right? They want to have a seat at the table because, again, science ends up meeting society, and society pushes back and has a funny way of saying, I like this thing, I don't like this thing. And by the way, why wasn't I included with not just my your point's a reasonable one. They're included as part of a clinical trial, but they want a voice in some of these things. And by the way, this is stuff that they push back and push hard on companies about all the time too. Why wasn't I included earlier? I think this is offensive. And for a lot of small biotech companies, they're trying to get the science right, and they don't always have teams and staff that do a great job reaching out to the patient community. So if they do it too late, it becomes a huge problem. Like, what do you mean you guys put this whole thing together and you didn't take the patient perspective into consideration, like when designing a clinical trial, for example?
You were saying that you had issues when McCary was there because there was a sort of change in what the FDA was saying that
Yeah.
companies needed to do from before. The idea of moving the goalposts. Now, when I spoke with Anish Koka in March, like his perspective was, it wasn't moving the goalposts, it was just protecting patients. And this is where we get into sort of a difference of opinion about what the FDA should be doing to safeguard public health, as is, their mission. The FDA decision should be based upon what the people put in charge at the FDA want to do there. I don't know if you were necessarily saying this should be sort of a democratic decision-making process for what drugs are approved or not.
Sorry. We have to roll. It's a mix. My point is, you have to rely on experts. I'm a big believer in, you have to rely on the experts, right? My point is just that the patient voice, and we do live in a democracy, and people ought to have a voice and a say along the way.
You're operating from just a different position than I have, one that, have a different viewpoint. And I think in one of our conversations before, you kind of said that you kind of like the status quo or something, like, I don't know, you referred to it as like, it's not the greatest system, but it works better than what you saw happening with the McCary, when McCary was running the FDA. Is that sort of a fair assessment?
Well, yeah, I'm a defender. So roll back the clock, 18 months. I'm a defender of the status quo, like over 40 years. like that's what I mean, again, with all the warts and challenges and problems, right? And again, I there was a lot to like, with the vision that I heard coming out of the FDA. But I think Sieber got the cell and gene therapy stuff fundamentally wrong. And in March, obviously, the administration finally said enough is enough, and they made a change at Sieber. And then subsequent to that, Marty McCary left. We have an interim FDA commissioner, an interim head of Sieber, the biologics wing, and an interim head of CDER. And what I can say is, over the last 3 months, the guys at CBER, overseeing the cell and gene therapy work, I think have been spot on. They have not reversed. They have altered course, and Unicure now has a path to being to being approved. REGENXBIO has a path to being approved, and so does Atara, Pierre Fabre. People obviously looked at what was going on and thought this was untenable. People, and I don't mean me, I mean people inside the administration. I think it was not aligned with their vision, with the spirit of right to try, and they said, "Look, this you can agree things went well or things didn't go well, but it just wasn't being handled well." And by the way, the first move that the acting head of the FDA made first public meeting he did was he went out and he met with the rare disease community. And I think that was a good decision.
But just to sort of put a final point on this, it's one thing if this is all just based upon disagreements or fundamental disagreements about policy or the way in which, the FDA should go about regulating specific things, and it's clear and transparent how those decisions are getting made. But it's a whole other thing. I mean, when you have the influence of bad actors in these decisions. We had fake rumors of sexual harassment claims against one of the people at FDA that later resigned. Like it was acknowledged that was just a false statement put in the Wall Street Journal. We also had Laura Loomer publicly going out and attacking Vinay Prasad. The fact that you can pay influencers to go after government officials to try to get them removed when said government officials are controlling decisions that influence the stock prices of companies, that is not a path to getting the public to trust biotech and trust pharma. It simply isn't. And so that's where, like, I don't know, again, I don't have a solution for this, but I see those things. Those are the ones that I'm focused on, and I think that's just a problem. You would say you disagree with the use of those type of tactics, I assume, just for the record.
Well, I'm not close to what those things were. I had seen the journal article. I didn't know one way or the other if it's true. Again, this relates to Vinay Prasad. I don't know the man. I met him once or maybe twice, but I really don't know him.
So, for example, does ARM pay influencers to do anything?
Of course not. Never.
All right, so let's go to a subject that I think we are in near alignment on, which is in March of 2025. You, along with the American Society of, the ARM, along with the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy and the International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, called for a 10-year moratorium on heritable human genome editing.
Yeah, so this is a topic that I became much more familiar with way back in 2016 when I joined. You'd referenced a company called Regenerative Medicine. They're still in existence. It's one of the early CRISPR gene editing companies, and there was even back then there was a lot of questions about could you use tools like CRISPR gene editing to edit embryos and try to make modifications to embryos to bring someone into the world. And it really struck me back then because there was a lot of buzz around that area. In the spring of 2015, there were some papers that Chinese scientists had gotten published saying they had done some early editing of embryos, not to bring them to term, but just to see if they could do the editing, make the edits. By December of 2015, there was the National Academy of Science held, along with the Royal Society, the Brits, and the Chinese Society, held a big international summit on germline, heritable germline gene editing. And then, so it was always sort of around. And as I started doing meetings on Capitol Hill in the spring of 2016, I was struck, Bryce, because talk about building trust. Like, people didn't really understand back then. A lot of the Hill staffers didn't quite understand gene therapy versus gene editing. And they thought the companies were working on editing embryos. And we're like, no way, like, you can't do it. It's actually, there's a law that prohibits that from happening in the US. And then over time, it's been clarified across basically all of Europe and many other countries. Okay, so why do I bring that up? Because you go to November of 2018, and I went to the second international summit on heritable gene editing in Hong Kong. And it was supposed to be a somewhat sleepy conference until Dr. Hay popped up and said, I have just edited what turned out to be 3 embryos, and they were all brought to term. So 3 children were born, the first kind of genetically modified children using CRISPR gene editing. He was doing it to try to knock out a gene that in theory would prevent HIV from being transmitted. And it really caused a giant international scandal. He ended up serving a few years, 3 years, I believe, in prison in China. And so from that kind of point forward, this issue has gone from, interesting roiling kind of thing to kind of full boil, and then it kind of comes up and down every few years. So we got together with our friend Keith Jung and a number of other people from the field and decided that we, as you know, ASGCT and ISCT, we ought to like convene and do something on this. The issue's not, essentially, it's not going away. It's considered by many to be the bioethical issue of a generation. And so in March of 2025, as you noted, we held a kind of one-day meeting. We brought in panels. We wanted to hear different people's different perspectives. We had a patient panel. I talk about more speech, more democracy, more engagement, even when you disagree with people. We brought in patient groups, patient voices, scientists, people that are doing all kinds of cutting edge research. We had a panel on religious perspectives, because this is really a societal thing, right? It's not really just for one or two people to kind of go off in a black box and decide, right? This is sort of experts need to open up the doors and hear from people. And so we tried to model some good behavior and brought in different voices. And we heard people saying, hey, I've got a kid that died from a rare disorder, and if anything could come along and prevent that down the road, I'd be open to it, right? Like, but we did that convening, and then the three groups emerged within, I think, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, something like that. And we called for a 10-year moratorium on anything that looked like germline editing.
Yeah, can you get into a little bit of the technical details here? So first of all, your organization supports different type of gene editing, right? Somatic cell editing.
Yeah. And I touched on this a little bit at the outset, right? So this is people that are walking around overwhelmingly, right? Like that. So it could be anything from babies to adults that we're working on. Heritable germline editing really is getting after reproductive cells. You're editing sperm, egg, or more, the one example I used was an embryo, right? Where at the very moment of conception, you're making these changes. First of all, germline, it's scientifically risky. Germline changes pass down to all future generations, right? It's essentially hard locks things, right? So if there's a good, bad, or ugly, if there is a change, it passes to all subsequent generations. And bear in mind, they have not given any consent, right? These are not people that are walking around. This is children that someone wants to bring into the world. So there are things called off-target effects or on-target effects or mosaicism mistakes that happen when you're doing work with gene editing tools. And if those mistakes happen and you're bringing a new child into the world, things can go horribly wrong, right? So you need like many, many years of preclinical work, animal work would need to be done at a minimum to start to show that, potentially someday this could work. And this would take many, many, many years, 10, 20, 25 years. The other thing is there isn't really any clear medical need, right? So what's the real medical use case for only using germline editing when there are going to be a lot of advances in somatic cell and gene therapy over the next many years? There's even things like fetal gene therapy. So when the baby is developed much further along, there could potentially be interventions. They have not taken place yet that I'm aware of in the US, but some scientists are trying to see, could you do ethical things that could help if you could detect that a fetus has a real genetic disorder, could you go in safely and ethically and go in and do that, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So those are part of the challenges.
Is the position of the ERM that there should be an opposition to this until it can be done safely, or do they oppose it just at all?
There's really a very, very, very limited medical use case where you can say, that's actually the area where you would really want to intervene. Again, there's no patient, no one's dying. It's really a desire for people to bring biological children into this world.
Is it fair to characterize it as eugenics?
I think people are concerned it's a slippery slope that could lead to things like, people that want to make more like enhancements. And I'm not talking about these gray areas where, Jesus, it's kind of more like health, but maybe you could kind of, like things like eye color, hair color, height, things like that. There are some companies that have popped up. I think this is another important point. It's become a little bit more acute of an issue over the last year, 18 months, because Silicon Valley's bankrolling a small number of sort of biotechy startups that say, hey, we want to do this, despite the fact that it's prohibited in the U.S., across most of Europe. China clarified that this is not going to be tolerated in China. Japan, there's lots of parts around the world. But some companies have popped up and said, well, we think we probably ought to do it, and then we can go and see if we can get some of these laws repealed.
So what is the law? So where is the law that says you can't do it? And maybe the second point there is the law that says you can't bring a child that is genetically modified into the world, or you can't implant a modified embryo or something like that?
So the FDA essentially asserted jurisdiction many, many years ago that if someone's going to go in and do a genetic modification of an embryo, it has to go through the FDA. So they basically said, we can't have this happening in garages and clinics and other places. Like, this needs to be like run through the FDA. So what the Heritable Amendment said was it's a funding prohibition. So it says no FDA staffer. So you would need to go to the FDA and essentially do the equivalent of file an IND to try to clear a clinical trial, essentially. And so the Heritable Amendment says the FDA staff can't review that. We determine what the FDA staff can spend their time on and what they can't. There no money, no facilities, no money can be used if someone is looking at the intentional modification of an embryo, essentially around things like using tools like CRISPR gene editing. And so it basically cut off any pathway to have a legal form of germline editing in the United States. You can do lab work. You can edit an embryo in an academic setting, for example, and companies that using private funds and some university, faculty have done some of that.
That's, I think, an interesting or a very important point, which is that, as you said, there are a lot of academics that are doing experiments right up to the point of implantation, right?
Yeah, and so it also raises things like we're talking about ethical, almost eugenic like real questions. So for example, like, well, who's going to call? And this also gets to governance issues. Who's going to call balls and strikes on this stuff, right? Like, right, you can just kind of do whatever you want. That doesn't sound like such a great idea, right? What look, I'm given the community I'm also part of. Our belief is that people should, we should have a world in which people love and respect and value people with intellectual disabilities and Down syndrome and rare genetic conditions and things like that, right? And so when you talk to people in the disability rights community, I've talked to people that have blindness, deafness, right? They want a world that's tolerant of 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 um, of their situations, right? And so there's some questions and concerns about it. Look, if we just sort of like Gattaca, right? Like the movie Gattaca, right? If everything just sort of gets purely eliminated, I hear that, right? Like, are there some concerns? You want people that are more sensitive to these various disorders.
This topic in particular, I think, is where in the future the most important discussions around scientific ethics are to be had.
Huge scientific questions, yeah.
This isn't a really important thing that you've done, is to go out and stake this position about a need for a moratorium. And again, to your point, or like what you said though, was that you're not actually saying that you oppose it, although I personally oppose it. I oppose this. But the moratorium, I think, does kind of, suggest that we really should seriously consider the ethics of this beyond whether it can be done safely. Because I do think that
Right.
ultimately you're not going to be able to prove safety on this unless you do these experiments in humans. So unless you're willing to use humans, and that also seems to be something that the community should be honest about. If you want to do these experiments, then you must defend producing babies with off-target effects. That is really where the discussion should go. The experiments that get you to doing this safely would involve multiple iterations of producing human offspring where you tried to do this and likely had some sort of catastrophic failure.
One of the reasons we did this were there were some academic groups, and I mentioned the rise of some of these companies that had flirted with this over the years, right? That said, maybe there's a translational pathway. How would we build it? What would it look like? And I think we were sort of like, as I said, like, what, time out. we need to flip the script in some ways on this. If you're one of the proponents of it, show us the specifics. Lay out all the specifics. Why would you pick on this one disorder? Like, there's really no other way to treat this condition, right? Like, what's the real burning platform of why you think this needs to be happening? And then get very specific about if you were going to approach a legitimate regulator with a package and say, I think I should be allowed to do this, walk us through the specifics. How would you handle on-target effects, off-target effects, mosaicism? How many generations of non-human primate data would you need? 4 to 5? 7 to 8? More? And how long would that take? And then a lot of people say primates are not going to be sufficient. You'd have to, so you're throwing the dice, essentially, this is not a patient walking around that's dying from a rare disorder. This is, I want to bring a new life into the world. So in my book, it raises the ethical bar that much even higher, which is why I think a lot of people legitimately say they could not see a path for germline gene editing ever.
The person that you're trying to treat doesn't exist. And what you can predict that in the future that advances in other therapeutic options might be sufficient to treat whatever disorder you're trying to treat in advance, perhaps.
Right.
Or final question I have for you with relation to this sort of area of the cell and gene therapies. Looking forward in the future, what are sort of the major breakthroughs or advances do you see on the horizon, or what are you most excited about?
There's a bunch of areas. So one is I mentioned the CAR T therapies, right? These are super effective products. About 80% of the patients that are eligible to get them actually don't get on therapy. So there's even work to be done with the existing therapies. How do you break down some of these little barriers?
So CAR T, that's for like patient-specific cancer therapies, right?
Yeah, liquid tumors. Yeah, but there's also in the future, there's a lot of work being done with cell therapies with solid tumors, CAR T therapies for autoimmune conditions, and then some other very specific ideas like Parkinson's disease. So we're talking about much more prevalent conditions, wet AMD. So it's going to go from, as I mentioned, sort of a break the glass kind of setting now to more common disorders. And I think that will then argue for where are we seeing things like randomized trials? Where is that appropriate versus not appropriate? If there's a standard of care or something else to compare it to. So those debates are playing out now in kind of real time and will certainly accelerate into the future. So a tremendous amount of hope and excitement about how to transform the lives of patients, cardiac conditions and things like that, that people are really excited about.
So I appreciate you coming on, Tim, and I look forward to continuing our conversations, perhaps another time on camera, but also off camera. And if you have anyone that would like to chat with me from the rare disease, the patient advocacy group, I certainly would welcome that conversation. So until next time, this has been Bryce Nickels on Science from the Fringe. Take care, everybody.